Hello and welcome. You're watching Inside India. I'm Amitoj Singh. These are your headlines. It will be another big day for IPOs in India, with stockbroking firm Grow braving the choppy markets and valuation concerns with its $800 million listing. Danish drug maker Novo Nordisk slashes the price of its weight loss drug Wegovy by over 30% in India as Big Pharma battle for market share in the South Asian country. And the CEO of Renew will talk to us about India's priorities at COP30, pollution, and how the renewables company is pushing to fully indigenize the country's solar value chain. All right, it's time now to take a look at the Asian markets. Wall Street ended mixed on Tuesday evening as Nvidia and other AI-linked stocks declined. Yes, it is once again the AI valuations. That's what's worrying investors. But take a look at your screens. Still, the Asian markets relatively positive. It seems like there are mixed feelings there too, because it's relatively muted. And what we are seeing is there's positivity from the US regarding the government shutdown likely to end. And at the same time, you have these valuation concerns. So this is a bit of a tricky one, but you're seeing the Nikkei really pushing closer to that 51,000 mark. But it appears it's the AI stocks that are holding it back. That's what we're going to be watching through, of course, today. Japan's SoftBank announced it sold its entire stake in Nvidia. SoftBank says the move is to fund another spending on artificial intelligence, including its Stargate infrastructure project with OpenAI. It's also not the first time SoftBank has cashed out of the AI chip darling. But after that sale, AI valuation concerns re-emerging in the markets. We spoke to Christopher Wood of Jefferies just in the last hour, and Wood admitted that there are concerns when it comes to the AI thematic. He also told us about why he pulled out of Nvidia.
I have no idea at this point who's going to successfully monetize the AI capex. So my preference has been to play the picks and shovels. But I have to say, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I took the position I took Nvidia out of my portfolio, which had been in since March, April 2023, simply because it had gone up many times. I'm reluctant to own the hyperscalers because they're spending a lot of money.
Well, we'll see how the markets react to that particular statement. The Indian markets, they are coming online in about 45 minutes. Here's what GIFT Nifty futures are indicating. Muted start slightly, but inching closer to 25,000, well, 26,000 really, just about 0.16% down at the moment, GIFT Nifty futures, but it's looking like it will still be a positive start in the long run, given what's happened in the last few days. We are hoping and, well, thinking about the fact that we could hit 26,000, which has not really happened in a couple of days, buoyed by the signs of progress announced by President Trump on the trade deal with India and the likely end of the US shutdown. Investors will be waiting for retail inflation data later today. We'll be watching that. And the RBI, will it really intervene to stop the rupee's weakness against the dollar, once again inching closer to the record low? And it's the week of big market debuts. All eyes on Billion Brains Garage. That's the parent company of Grow, as its shares hit the Mumbai market today. Ahead of listing, grey markets are pointing to a slight premium over the expected issue price. Grow's $754 million IPO saw robust demand, subscribed more than 17 times thanks to heavy buying from institutional investors. Sovereign funds of Norway, Abu Dhabi and Singapore were among the buyers of shares reserved for anchor investors. And we're in the thick of earnings season. Tata Power reporting a 14% rise in Q2 profits. The company is also making a big solar move. It plans to build India's largest solar ingot and a wafer plant, a 10-gigawatt facility that will complete its entire solar manufacturing chain. The shift comes as higher US tariffs make exports tougher, pushing Indian firms to go upstream. It also fits New Delhi's drive to cut dependence on China and boost local production. But they aren't the only ones. Meantime, billionaire Gautam Adani too is charging up India's clean energy ambitions. Reports say Adani plans to build a multi-billion-dollar battery energy storage project in Gujarat, invest in India, said to be India's largest, among the biggest in the world when completed by March 2026. The facility will anchor Adani's vast renewable complex and could scale up to 50 gigawatt hours within 5 years. It could be a key step as India looks to double its clean power capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030, and that's been a goal for some time. And all of this comes as the COP30 is underway in Brazil. At the summit, India reaffirmed that the architecture of the Paris Agreement must not be altered, stressing that Article 9.1 legally binds developed nations to provide climate finance to developing countries. Speaking for the grouping of developing countries, India said finance remains the biggest barrier to stronger climate action, urging a clear definition of climate finance and a 15-fold increase in adaptation funding. It also warned that unilateral trade measures like the EU's carbon border tax risk becoming protectionist tools that burden poorer nations. All right. Joining us now is Suman Sinha. He is the founder of one of India's largest renewable power developers. The former banker joins us as COP40 is underway, that conference of parties that have signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's interestingly underway in Brazil, in Belém, at the mouth of the Amazon River. And I'm sure you want to comment on that, the significance, the optics of that. Well, as possibly great optics, the US has not sent a delegation. And you, sir, have previously said the commitments in COP don't add up, and we are falling behind. So what material change can be expected at COP30?
Yeah, hi, Amitoj. Pleasure to be here. Look, I think any COP is a very important event because this is when all countries get together and rediscuss how they need to move towards climate change and battle climate change and how to bend the carbon emissions trajectory down. I think this year's COP is being obviously held in Brazil. Brazil is the one that has been pushing forward the agenda along with the UNFCCC this year. Our expectation is, of course, that this is the year when all the countries will revise their NDCs. It's been 10 years since Paris and 5 years since the last NDCs were presented. So I think all eyes have been on what the new NDCs will be and where these new NDCs in aggregate, therefore, take the world on what kind of trajectory and what kind of temperature increase path do they put us on. So that's really something that has been interesting. Most countries, in fact, now have come out with their NDCs. India still has not presented ours. But it seems fairly clear that we're now on path to bend the trajectory downwards by about 10 to 15% compared to the 2019 peak by 2035. That's not nearly sufficient enough. But I think that's one of the things clearly that everybody is watching out for. And the second thing, as you said earlier, is on financing, because for the global South, financing is a very important aspect of what happens. And so I think that's the other thing that everybody has been carefully watching out for.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think I said COP40 at some point. I think I was thinking about how India is getting ready to host, or at least proposing to host some of the next ones. Apologies for that. I just want to understand a little bit more about your understanding regarding India's statement that has come as COP has got underway. Once again, making the point, and you mentioned that unilateral measures force developing and low-income nations to bear the cost of the transition to low-carbon economies when historically it's developed nations that have really benefited from industrialization. This is an argument that's been made for a while now. You've been seeing it. How do you see India in the current climate debate actually achieving its goals? It's a tough one, isn't it?
I think that India is taking a very important position, and that is that we are trying to take the lead among the global South countries. And keep in mind that it is really the global North, as it were, the West, that has actually caused the bulk of the carbon to be in the atmosphere. And especially when you look at it on a per capita basis, the global South has actually not done anything at all in terms of carbon emissions. In fact, most of our development is ahead of us. So I think there are two things that India is doing. Number one, we are trying to take the lead on behalf of the global South and say that, look, we didn't cause this problem, you guys did. Therefore, the burden of solving this problem really has to be on your shoulders more than it has to be on our shoulders. So I think that is one very important factor. The second very important thing that India is doing is, while it is saying what it's saying on point number one, it's also showing the pathway to the global South countries on how you can now develop in a much less carbon emissions intensive manner. And that is through pushing renewable energy. It's doing all the things that we're doing, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But that's really showing a pathway to everybody in the world as to how you can actually grow as a developing country with significant energy growth without necessarily using fossil fuels as a way forward. So I think we're doing this dual track sort of an approach right now, where we are on the one hand trying to get the best deal for ourselves from the Western world, and at the same time trying to find a totally different pathway of growth for ourselves.
I just want to ask you one question. Is the West listening?
I think they are, of course, listening. They have to. They have no choice, because this is a common and it's a global problem that all of us are involved with. So they have to listen to the global South as well. This is a problem that can't be solved without everybody pulling in the same direction. They have obviously agreed to the common but differentiated responsibilities in principle. Of course, what should have been done has not been done in adequate measure. As you know, at Baku, at COP29, there was this whole conversation around how much financing should be provided by the Western world to the global South. And while the ask was $1.3 trillion a year, ultimately only $300 billion was committed. But even that is not clear exactly how that should come through. So if you look at the actual outcomes, you would argue that the Western world is not listening, which is sad. But on the other hand, if you look at all the dialogue and the conversation that is happening, of course, they are listening and they are trying to do whatever I think they are in a position to do. And the big issue, of course, is that the US is no longer part of these conversations. And so that's a big part of the Western world that is no longer there.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that the US has listened in the past, but the fact that they're not even in Brazil is a reflection of where these talks have, you know, it's just looking like there's no path forward. But there are those out there in Brazil very optimistic of using this to their advantage, that there will be other global nations that will emerge as leaders on climate and take the mantle forward. We'll talk about that in just a bit, but given you're in Gurugram, you're not in Brazil, I just want to get back to India, and you know, there's just no better time to talk about the need for action when it comes to pollution. India's capital has been facing this, well, for years, you know, a decade more. The Delhi pollution that brought people onto the streets just a couple of days ago. Experts say this is worsening, and the air pollution is having a ruinous impact on its economy, on India's economy, with one study estimating losses to the tune of $95 billion annually, or roughly 3% of the country's GDP. What's the solution to Delhi's pollution?
It's a vexing issue, to be honest with you, and it's a tragic issue for those of us who live here. To experience this every year, you know, and all the impact it has on our health and our productivity and lost man hours and of work and so on, escalating health costs. So it's really not good. It's also not good for, obviously, for India's reputation. We obviously we have a target that the Honorable Prime Minister has set of becoming a Viksit Bharat by 2047. We need to solve this problem, essentially. Otherwise, we're not going to get to being Viksit Bharat with this kind of pollution. I think the solution has to be that we need concerted government action across all the state governments of northern India, I think coordinated by the central government. We need many more electric vehicles on the road. We need very stringent curbs on construction, because construction dust, you know, is one of the biggest problems that we have. We need to be able to ensure that, especially during this part of the year, which is around the October-November time period, when the wind stops blowing as rapidly as it does in other parts of the year, some of these issues get stopped and get banned for maybe a couple of months during this time period. I think we need pretty radical solutions if we have to address this problem, because it's not going away, as you said. Stubble burning has been something that has been painted or pointed out earlier. This year, it doesn't seem to have contributed as much to the problem. So maybe that's something that is getting addressed, perhaps. But all these other factors really need to be addressed in very, very rapid manner for it to deal with this problem.
Yeah, Sumant, you were living abroad. You moved back to start this company. We know that you've had a very interesting journey as an entrepreneur after being, a corporate stalwart. I've lived in Gurugram. You are living there. We've been stuck with this Delhi pollution problem, and it's really devastating to families, to children. There was hope that after the New Delhi elections, which were won by the central government and the party behind that, that things would actually change. It's a very complicated issue. I've covered it. I understand that there are farmers in Punjab, in a northern state. There is this climate problem where the wind doesn't come around this time. It is indeed difficult. But now you have what you call in India double engine. A local government run by the same party and a national government run by the same party in Delhi. Do you think we have the impetus now to make this happen? And I know that it's just been a little time, so it may take some time. But is it possible, do you think?
No, I'm very hopeful because obviously, the Prime Minister is very focused on making sure that India does develop and India has a good reputation to attract investments. You can't have a city in which you have all the multinational companies, based out of India. You can't have a situation where people travel into India at this time of the year and then they come and see the kind of pollution that we have. So I think the government has to recognize that. And as you said, now that we have the same government at the state level and the central level, I would be very hopeful that this is an issue that can be resolved. And it's not just this issue. I mean, keep in mind issues around the pollution in the Yamuna as well have to be dealt with. Groundwater issues have to be dealt with, which are again across NCR type problems. So I think all of these very significant and critical issues now with the same governments across the states and the center, hopefully now start getting addressed and tackled.
I just want to get back to your company for a minute. Thanks so much for addressing what is clearly a difficult question. Just tell us a little bit about the solar value chain and how Renew is pushing to fully, indigenize this. How far ahead you really are in terms of that?
Right now, I would say this is an area where government policy has really been quite good. In that the decision, I think a strategic decision was taken that we need to have a fully local domestic supply chain in solar, and starting with modules and then cells and now for wafers. The government is coming out with rules that essentially require us to start using domestic goods. And so that's why now we have a module industry in India, which is more than 100 gigawatts in size. Cells, probably by the end of next calendar year, will probably be about 40, 50 gigawatts as well, which will be almost enough to meet domestic demand. And now you'll probably start seeing a lot of investments on the ingot and wafer side, including what you just announced from some of our competitors. And I think, we are also looking at it, of course, very seriously. So I think you'll start seeing more and more production happening on ingot and wafers as well. And whenever the government decides to go further back up the value chain on poly, I think you'll start seeing that. So by the end of this whole situation and over the next 4 or 5 years, you'll probably have a fully indigenized supply chain in solar, which is going to be really unique because we'll be the only country in the world other than China that has that. And therefore, we can actually become the +1 to China. And I think that's very important because you can't have a whole, global clean energy transition happening with dependence only on one country. So here you'll have at least another country that has sizable capacities. And over time, we'll probably be able to bring our costs down quite a lot closer to Chinese costs. So I think that's really healthy.
Right.
And then, of course, we have investments happening in batteries and electrolyzers and so on. So I think eventually you'll have a pretty broad clean energy supply chain.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the China +1 manufacturing thought because we've talked about manufacturing in India being a laggard, and you're confident and have mentioned this previously that we will get there. We're not getting there right now. We will get there. The government is making a push. There has, in fact, been a renewed, reform announcement by the government around a national manufacturing mission that just came in the last couple of days. But because we're running out of time, we're just going to ask you this one final question to your company, Renew. Really, Q2 results of Renew have come. 84% net profit increase year on year in FY 2026, but you wanted to delist from the Nasdaq. The promoters have made a final offer on October the 10th, and it's been more than a month. So I feel comfortable asking you, can you give us an answer on this?
First of all, just to talk about the company's performance, we're doing actually quite well this year. Our first half profit after tax is close to 1,000 crores, which I think is almost double of what we generated all of last year. So I think our business is doing very well, and we have a lot of visibility and runway for growth in terms of the PPAs that we've got signed and so on. So I think as far as our business is concerned, we're doing quite well. I think that's the important thing to note. As far as the delisting process is concerned, there's very little I can say about that, unfortunately, given that I am one of the people involved as part of the consortium that is making the take private offer. And that is something that the company itself will have to talk about. So I'm somewhat constrained in terms of what I can say.
Okay, at least give us an idea of when we can know more.
Hard for me to do that, unfortunately. I think the company will
Okay.
come out of the appropriate press releases when it does.
All right, Sumant, I do appreciate you taking all our questions. Thanks so much. That was Sumant Sinha, CEO of Renew. But while we're on the topic of clean energy, let's also talk about SAF, or Sustainable Aviation Fuel, to combat carbon emissions from aviation. Countries are turning to SAF, but who really pays for it? CNBC's travel and transport reporter, Monica Petrelli, is here to tell us. Monica, what's this about? Why are we paying for this?
Well, we weren't until now, and if you are flying out of Singapore, that is. So we're seeing Singapore. We knew Singapore already saying come 2026, it was going to start blending 1% SAF with regular jet fuel. But we didn't know who was going to pay for it. And this has been a big topic in the industry. Do passengers pay for it? Do the government? Now we're seeing Singapore saying, look, if you're flying, you're part of this situation, you're going to be part of the answer here. So all passengers flying out of Singapore can expect to pay between $1 to $42 come next October to help subsidize the cost of SAF. Now we are seeing more governments moving to this way. In fact, India expected to come out with its own SAF policy very soon. In fact, we don't know when, but we know it will be soon. Now this is something that we heard Modi talking about at the IATA annual general meeting back in June, saying really India can not only mandate usage, but also has the potential to be a big producer. And that is because India produces so much biomass. This is used to make SAF. Well, much of this coming from agriculture, but also municipal waste, even things like used cooking oil. So you contrast that with Singapore also, who's trying to produce SAF right now. Countries now saying we don't want to just mandate it, we want to make it if it is in fact the fuel of the future. But Singapore imports most of its biomass. India has it right there on tap. Now, one of the key things here, you want to make sure that you use waste and not purpose-driven, because that opens up another can of worms about who is, how is the SAF being produced. You want to make sure that it's waste and not, cutting into food production and those types of things. But from India, we can expect to hear targets for production, investment, and also usage. Many thinking that this 1% for all flights could in fact start from 2027 and then ramp up to even 5% SAF blending by 2030.
I appreciate that, Monica. There has been developments around ethanol, so this was kind of expected, and we've had the ministries of different departments really talking about this for a couple of days. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to take a short break. Back in 2 minutes. A lot more coming up. Welcome back. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is saying the conspirators behind the Delhi car blast will, quote, not be spared and brought to justice. Modi is currently on a state visit to Bhutan. Meantime, police across India have ramped up security following Monday's deadly car explosion near the Red Fort, which killed at least 8 and injured 20. Checkpoints, vehicle searches and heightened patrols have been put in place in multiple cities like Lucknow, Dehradun and Srinagar. Officials say malls, markets, transport hubs and VIP areas are being monitored closely, with the blast now under investigation under India's anti-terror laws. Meanwhile, a suicide bomber killed at least 12 people in Pakistan's Islamabad, the first attack on civilians in the capital in a decade. The blast that happened outside a court wounded more than 24 people. Officials say the attack was designed to spread panic amid high tensions with Afghanistan. Islamabad has warned it will respond if Kabul fails to curb the militant groups it says are behind the bloodshed. The Taliban government in Afghanistan has denied any role and expressed deep sorrow over the attack. Coming up, we will head to the Singapore FinTech Festival, where the buzz is around the tech blueprint for the next decade of finance. We'll speak to Ray Harishankar of IBM Research after this short break about quantum safe. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are counting down to the market open in India. This is how we are looking. Well, it seems like it's going to be positive because right now, Nifty 50, it closed the last session at about 25,694.95. But the Gifty Nifty futures indicating a much more positive start, even though we are keeping in mind several considerations, geopolitical uncertainties. We still don't have a trade deal, and we don't have a resolution on the tariffs. But at this point in time, what you're seeing is that just because the US President Donald Trump has said that we are close to reaching a trade deal with India to bring down tariffs on Indian goods, that seems to be picking up the market. It had fallen below 25,000, but it's now looking like it might even touch 26,000 when it opens in about 15 minutes. We'll be looking at that very closely. But let's just head out now to the Singapore FinTech Festival, where leaders in the sector are discussing the tech blueprint for the next decade of finance. JP Ong is on the ground and leading our coverage. JP, what do you have for us?
Yeah, Matosh, good morning. And as you can see, the volume has really picked up here on the 10th Singapore FinTech Festival, and a lot of discussions revolving around cross-border payments, digital assets, artificial intelligence, how that might turbocharge things. But there is one topic that's also in front and center for everyone here, and maybe has been overshadowed the last couple of years because of the advent of AI, and that is quantum computing. Again, the potential to transform and even potentially disrupt a lot of things has many raising questions about the potential and things we'll have to prepare for. On one hand, could this actually upend and necessitate a retooling of how encryption is handled right now, especially given many blockchains right now run on some of these new encryption technologies that we've just gotten more comfortable in recent times, and thus a new rehauling might be necessitated. But before we answer that, we'll have to figure out exactly where we are in quantum computing and how quickly how far we are from perhaps encountering this more commonly. And that's why our next guest is going to be very important in leading this, in actually having this discussion. And that is Ray Harishankar, who is the Vice President for IBM Research and actually looks at quantum computing on a day-to-day basis. Probably forgotten more about quantum computing than any of us collectively know about. Here to tell us exactly where we are and what this entails for us in the future. Ray, thank you for joining us. And before we get into the disruptive potential for quantum computing, I think the first and most logical question to ask is, where are we right now in terms of quantum computing? Because it seems we're getting a number of stories and anecdotes from different people. We'd rather hear from someone who deals with this on a day-to-day basis. Exactly where are we right now in terms of breakthroughs of quantum computing as compared to, say, 3 years ago?
First of all, JP, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with you. To answer your question directly, where are we with respect to quantum computing? We have made more progress in the last 10 years than we have made in the years before that. So we are making more and more progress in quantum computing on a daily basis. Where are we today? Let me give you an example as to what you may have seen in the media about a month or so ago, when HSBC announced that they have used IBM's quantum computing and have developed a quantum computing based model for better addressing their bond derivatives, and they achieved over 35% performance improvement than compared to purely classical alone. So what does that tell us? That tells us that quantum computing is here, it is real, it is making progress, and there are a number of financial institutions like Wells Fargo and Vanguard, in addition to HSBC, that have been applying quantum computing to improve their day-to-day performance on an experimental basis.
Okay, so the question now also is, because when we think about when people try to imagine quantum computing, it seems like a very new and novel way of building computers. And the question is, how far away are we from actually seeing these used commercially and in more broad scales? How far away are we from seeing quantum computing, maybe not in our daily lives for everybody, but more prominent among institutions say, hey, this has now transformed how we actually handle computing operations?
So many of you may not be aware that I come from IBM, as you pointed out, and IBM put out the first quantum computer on the cloud in 2016. Since then, in the last 9 years, we have deployed over 80 quantum computers on the cloud that are available for people to use. And we also have about 9 quantum computers installed outside of our cloud on specific client premises where clients like HSBC, Wells Fargo, Cleveland Clinic are using the quantum computer to learn and to build algorithms and to begin to apply them in their business on a daily basis. So quantum computer is here. It is making progress. Now, looking ahead, where will we be in a few years? And when will we have, as you said, the daily business use that we may see there? We believe that we will have what we call as a fault-tolerant quantum computer, which means that right now the quantum computers face certain errors and faults, as we call them, and they will be addressed, we believe, by 2028-2029 timeframe, at which point you will find that more and more clients are beginning to use quantum computer on a daily basis in their business. And we are continuing to work with clients beginning now to get there.
So we've got about 5 to 7 years before we actually see it being deployed. And the reason I asked that, Ray, is because there are questions now being raised about not just the potential for quantum computing to transform businesses, but also because it might need a rethink or an overhaul of cryptographic standards and security right now because of its ability to break through these things. We were just getting a familiarity with blockchains,
right?
And now they're talking about quantum computers perhaps breaking through these at the snap of a finger and overhauling these. Is there going to be a need to rethink cryptographic standards because of quantum computing's advent, and how would one go about doing that?
Yeah, the short answer, JP, is yes. But before I get there, let me clarify one thing. I didn't mean to say that quantum computers will become useful in the next 7 years. They are being used today. They will become increasingly powerful and more useful over the next 4 years. Now, that's early use cases of quantum computing, right? One of those use cases, interestingly enough, is to break encryption, right? Because there is an algorithm that is currently available called Shor's algorithm that, when applied in a quantum computer, can break encryption as we use it today. So that means that the algorithms exist. They can be applied on quantum computers. However, we typically tend to use what is known as RSA 2048 as an encryption protocol, which is using 2048 bits. And so in order to break that encryption, you need a powerful enough quantum computer, and that we believe will be available in the 7 to 8 year time frame. Mid-2030s is when we look at it. Now you may say, what happens then? What happens is encryption, as we currently know, asymmetric encryption to be precise, that is used in communication, right, will be broken using Shor's algorithm at that time, which means all of the digital communication that we exchange are likely to be compromised. Digital identities can be compromised, and fraudulent transactions can occur. Now, that is what happens when we have a quantum computer of sufficient scale and capacity. However, it's a double-edged sword. What's happening today is motivated bad actors are exfiltrating data today, as we speak, with no way of decrypting it, but with the hope that they can store it today and then wait till a quantum computer of sufficient scale becomes available and then decrypt it at that time. This issue is called harvest now, decrypt later.
Right.
So two problems. One, harvest now, decrypt later occurs today, and then when a quantum computer becomes available, communication encryption can be broken, and real-time challenges will begin to appear.
So how do we address some of these potential risks? And I guess the question is, how do you overhaul or retool encryption standards to make sure that they become quantum-proofed, if
Correct.
I can call that? Or can quantum solutions perhaps even could quantum developments provide the solutions to these as well?
So we call that quantum safe, right? So whenever I say quantum safe, I refer to a set of systems that are immune from quantum as well as classical attacks. So to answer your question directly, current classical algorithms that we use for encryption use a problem called factorization, and that is what Shor's algorithm breaks. So in order to address the future, what we need are algorithms that cannot be broken by classical as well as quantum computers in the future. Now, not to worry, we have such algorithms available. In 2016, NIST started a competition, NIST being National Institute of Standards and Technology, ran a competition to come up with algorithms that cannot be broken by classical as well as quantum. Fast forward to today, 4 algorithms were selected. 3 of them have been standardized, and a small plug for IBM, 3 of the algorithms were created by people from IBM working with the academia. So we have solutions. We have those algorithms available, and more are being added to that list as well. Now, to your point, these algorithms need to be incorporated in place of classical algorithms today. That is a large task. Every single instance of classical encryption usage or classical cryptography usage have to be replaced by post-quantum cryptography. That is a work that takes several years. So what we recommend to enterprises, particularly financial services clients, are that they start their work today to begin planning how they can replace classical cryptography with post-quantum cryptography, because it takes several years to replace it.
Yeah, Ray, and very quickly, my last question is that we talk about how it's a necessity to adapt and to become familiar with AI. Does the same apply for quantum computing? Either adapt to this reality or get left behind or get obsoleted, if I may use that bleak term?
There are 2 answers to that, two aspects to that answer. One is, yes, for, as I said earlier, HSBC, Wells Fargo, and Vanguard, these are early adopters of quantum technology who are beginning to adopt it for business differentiation and establishing their leadership. So yes, adopt it, or you may find that you are going to be left behind your competition. The second is, on the cryptography side, you have no choice. You have to change. Otherwise, you are likely to be compromised from a security standpoint, and that is a risk that no one is willing to take.
Yeah, and also, Ray, unfortunately, a lot more work to try and retool and overhaul these. But again, there is no, it's futile to combat the inevitable. And it seems like this is something we'll have to deal with and observe for the next couple of years. Ray Harishankar from IBM Research, thank you for joining us and helping us get a better understanding, just a qubit more understanding with regards to quantum computing and how that might transform the financial space and society as a whole. Amitarj, it's back to you, but that's just the latest of a number of other conversations we're going to be having here on the 10th edition, that is, of the Singapore FinTech Festival.
We'll come back to you, JP. Don't go anywhere. This has been a fascinating conversation. I was listening intently. Thanks so much for that. Now, we're counting down to the market open in Mumbai. It has opened. We're coming back to you with the latest in just a bit. All right, Indian markets coming online as I'm speaking. That was the pre-market we were just talking about, but you see how GIFT Nifty futures was indicating 25,900, but at this point in time, it's inching closer, really jumping from that 25,600 mark all the way to about 820, 823 as we speak. The US dollar, though, strengthening against the Indian rupee looking weaker. And this has been a problem that the RBI, India's central bank, has been trying to intervene on. There have been reports just recently, in fact today, that they've gone ahead and sold billions of US dollars to kind of stem the flow of the weakness towards the Indian rupee. We're going to be watching this. There's inflation data coming in later, retail inflation data. The markets will obviously react to that. For the moment, they're looking positive, keeping in mind that the US government shutdown is likely to end, and that's perhaps what the markets are reacting to. All right, in the meantime, a Danish drug maker Novo Nordisk has cut prices on its weight loss drug Wegovy by up to 37% in India. The move comes as the company fights for market share against US rival Eli Lilly, whose Mounjaro has quickly become India's top-selling obesity treatment. Now, the highest dose of Wegovy will cost 16,000 rupees a month, down from nearly 24,000. The price cut also comes ahead of the drug's patent expiry in March 2026, which will open the door for generics and is seen as an effort to boost sales and widen access across India. All right, we're going to jump across to the crypto space, give you an indication of what's really going down there. Bitcoin down 2.58%, Ether down 3.64%. This is not unusual. This happens in crypto all the time. BNB and Ripple also down, Ripple particularly down. But remember, if you think this is bad news, keep in mind that Bitcoin ETFs have pulled in just today 300 million as traders are rushing to buy that dip. Remember, Bitcoin was at about 125,000. Now it's come down to 103. It was at 105 a couple of days ago. But this happens, and it'll be interesting to understand more about this with Paul Brody. He is the global blockchain leader at Ernst & Young, and he's sitting right here with me at the SGX. It's great to be back with you, Paul. It's been a while. Thanks so much for joining us. I know you're here for the Singapore FinTech Festival, so I want to actually start by asking you about that. There have been so many developments regarding Singapore. Wait, let's just talk about the markets for a minute. What do you make of this?
So actually, you captured it perfectly. Like, it's just another day in crypto, the ups and downs, right? And I think particularly for people in this space, it's a feature, not a bug, the level of volatility, right? There's a reason why we call stablecoins, because if you want stability, get yourself some US dollars.
Yeah, no, I understand that. We'll come to stablecoins in just a bit. There's a lot to talk about that, the movement there. But let's talk Singapore for a minute, because we have the Singapore FinTech Fest happening right now. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen significant institutional developments. Standard Chartered has partnered with DCS Card for D-Card, a new credit card that lets users spend stablecoins in everyday transactions. That's big. DBS has also announced the launch of something you love, tokenized structured notes on Ethereum for trading. So just paint a picture for the viewers on where Singapore stands today as opposed to its competitors, Dubai and Hong Kong.
So Singapore is actually doing really well, I think, relatively speaking. Couple of key things that are going on. First of all, you need to have a really good regulatory environment where people know the rules of the road. I think the number one lesson from the last 5 or 6 years of crypto is if you want high quality participants like DBS and the others you just talked about, you need to have very good rules, otherwise they won't join in. So Singapore's really good regulatory environment, the predictability of the regulatory environment, and the maturity of the regulators plays into this opportunity space. The second thing is Singapore is just a really, really good market. It's very similar to Dubai and Hong Kong in terms of like sophisticated investors, financial firms, and others. It's a regional hub. It's a little bit hard to separate those things out, but I think the quality of regulation absolutely makes a big difference in terms of giving people the green light.
Yeah. Think of a startup in crypto and they want to set up office. Where do they do it? Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai? That's been the question, right? Who's winning this battle?
If I look at our business and some of the work that we're doing, I would say at the moment there's definitely an edge to Singapore. We have probably more clients here. They're doing more ambitious things, probably here than anywhere else except for the United States, which has really that market sort of roared back to life after the Genius Act in a really big way.
Genius Act is the stablecoin bill. We'll come to that in just a bit, but I want to talk about India inside India. There have been a number of developments related to India that came out of Singapore, in fact. Singapore court basically gave a judgment around one of India's biggest crypto exchanges was Rex, and the hack that had happened, $235 million. What we are seeing now is that has happened, but at the same time, there's a high court that has said that a particular customer of WazirX had some coins on WazirX, and that needs to be the ownership, the property of that individual. And at the same time, you have a draft legislation which has been in cold storage. A lot happening there. CoinDCX, now the biggest exchange out there in India, got investments from Coinbase, but was also hacked in the last couple of months. How do you view India in all of this that's going on?
So India is probably the biggest market out there other than China that's hugely sort of underperforming its potential. If you think about the Indian market, first of all, you have some really interesting ingredients. In general, the regulatory environment is not very pro-crypto. Regulators are very careful and cautious about sort of fueling speculation and things like that. On the other hand, you've got an incredibly sophisticated investing audience. You have a hugely sophisticated technology ecosystem where you have lots of developers who are using this kind of technology. They have wallets, they're developing wallets. We at EY do all of our back office, like software development and engineering for crypto and blockchain. We do it in India. So there's just a whole ecosystem of sophisticated developers.
Yeah, no, India is game on for blockchain. Let's talk stablecoins. There's a global disagreement, perhaps led by Indian policymakers, around stablecoins, and this has happened at the G7 and the G20 level, at the financial stability level, financial stability board level. They argue that stablecoins will dollarize the economy. You've, in your notes, also mentioned that right now, 99% of stablecoins are dollarized. This is a battle ongoing between India and the rest of the world on stablecoins. How do you see this playing out? Yes, the US has got a bill. The world is adopting stablecoins, but India is saying no way.
So I think the Indian regulators are right. Stablecoins are driving dollarization. And so one of the sort of forks in the road is, do you decide to compete by having a really good, robust regulatory regime for stablecoins in your own country, or do you try to shut them out? Right. I think, if you talk to policymakers in Europe, and it's very interesting, MiCA, the MiCA legislation was really driven by this decision to, instead of trying to ignore or downplay or reject, they wanted to create a framework that would improve the quality of the ecosystem. So I think one of the things you can really see over the last few months, and you can really see it here in Asia, is the nature of the discussion has changed. So there is broad agreement on the risks. There's risks around global dollarization. There's risks around kind of the potential impact on like bank deposits and other things. But there is also opportunity and competition. And I think that the balance of the conversation has shifted from the dangers of not being in to the dangers of being in to the dangers of not being in and being left behind.
Yeah, don't reject it, find a way around it. That's basically what you're saying. Talk to us about market structure legislation in the US, which is expected to be the next turbocharger. We've had the Genius Act, we've had stablecoins, we've had President Trump winning power in the US. Those were, the movements that have propelled the market. Now we have this market structure legislation. It does appear to be a bipartisan issue. But will it go through government shutdown, delayed negotiations? Just tell us a little bit about that.
It's really hard to speculate exactly what legislation will come out. I think expectations for market structure legislation might be too high. It's not going to be a turbocharger. In fact, already, in the past, there was this argument, okay, wouldn't it be great to have the CFTC be responsible instead of the SEC? But that was when the SEC was not very friendly and the CFTC was. Now, universally, we have a friendly regulatory regime across the U.S. market. The stablecoin bill carves out specifically the rules for that, which are really sort of driving that. And the SEC has their jurisdiction over all these like tokenized real-world securities. So I feel like it will be a positive thing. It will be a reminder that there can be good bipartisan agreement on crypto policy, but I don't think it's going to be a big turbocharger.
CFTC or SEC, who should, according to you, be leading this?
So I actually think that the proposed concept in the market structure bill makes a lot of sense. Cryptocurrencies do seem to behave like commodities, and so that's great. But then if it's a stable coin or a security that's being tokenized, it should stay with the SEC. They're already regulating
It's a difficult one. We all admit to that. Okay, I want to talk to you about what I'd say is your biggest passion, Ether. It's been underperforming, right? It is the application on which they think that the next, billion will come. It is where they say that the action will be. There's competition coming in some form in invention from Bitcoin that people can actually now build on Bitcoin. Long way off. But why is Ethereum not performing as well as it should?
The answer to that is a couple of things. The first is that I think in general, if you look at Ethereum and Bitcoin, they tend to not quite march in lockstep, but they move in a very similar range. And it's because I think the vast majority of retail investors still don't see them as fundamentally different things. If you really, inside the community ecosystem, you really understand Bitcoin is a crypto asset, Ethereum is more of a development and engineering platform. The second thing, though, is that a lot of Ethereum's value comes from the transaction fees. And as always in this case, right, it's a matter of supply and demand setting the kind of market clearing price. The thing that Ethereum has done incredibly well is grow capacity. Ethereum 3 or 4 years ago could do 1 million transactions a day. Today it can do hundreds of millions across all these layer 2 networks. Capacity has just risen a lot more than demand. Demand is rising, and I'm bullish because I believe over time, a little bit like computer memory or processing power, we will use all the transaction capacity we can lay our hands on. But at the moment, there's way more supply than there is demand.
All right. Well, there's just so much I want to ask you, but we don't have time. And I really appreciate you coming out here in the studio. Great conversation. Thanks so much for that, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right. That was Paul Brody from EY. That's all the time we have today on Inside India. Keep watching CNBC. Access Middle East is up next.